Okay, everybody, welcome to our second session. We're going to pick up with functional principles, which starts on 27, page 27, and our lecture is being presented today by Amanda Chmela. Okay, Amanda?
All right, hi everyone. I'll just share my screen with you guys. And should we wait for the rest of the people to go into the... We have some people in the waiting room still. Billy?
They're being admitted, so I think we can get started.
All right, cool. All right. So I'm going over functional principles, registers, and belting. This is pages 28 through 33 in the text, and I checked, they do match the numbers in the PDF. And for each of the slides, I have a page number right at the top left. So if you want to reference where I'm at, that's where you can see it. So let me just move this out of my way. So vocal register is a group of sounds with a unified tonal quality or texture. As Jeannie mentioned earlier in her presentation, there are quite a few other definitions that are all on page 24. A vocal register is a functional response within the larynx. It's how the vocal folds, it has to do with how the vocal folds themselves are vibrating, but it is also that vocal color or texture that identifies it. The core of somatic voice work rests on the use of vocal registers. We have chest register, which is a thyroarytenoid, or TA, with the abbreviation, dominant muscle, is the muscle that works chest register. It's the muscle of the actual vocal folds themselves. We typically associate it with lower pitches and increased volume. But with practice and with strengthening, that register can go amongst a whole array of pitches. Head register is a cricothyroid-dominated movement. The cricothyroid muscle, abbreviated CT, controls how the vocal folds are pulled and tilted a little bit to give those higher pitch ranges. But we can bring that function down as well. In our beginner singers, think head register, higher pitch, medium to soft volumes. The higher you get, you can add a little bit more volume. And mix is then a combination of both. We assume that all voices, including children's voices, have these two register qualities, and that the third quality of mix comes about, and it can be called blended, coordinated, balanced, middle, mixed. So all of those terms mean the same thing. It's just the blending of those two registration qualities together. Register balance. So the goal of any vocalist should be a smooth transition from one register or another to another throughout the pitch range, unless we're in a specific style that asks for it to be otherwise. If you're in country music or yodeling, like what Jeannie had mentioned earlier, you might want that where it just goes back and forth and isn't particularly smooth. I hear it more and more in pop music as well as a stylistic little flip, sometimes even on the same pitch. Someone will do that by pulling back their volume really quickly. Register balance is worked on by taking the registers apart to learn to put them together deliberately. You can't coordinate what you don't have. If you just ask someone, oh, you just need it to be smooth, you need to mix it together. Well, mix what? Your student and you need to have a really clear idea, both conceptually and physically, of what it is to be just in chest register and just in head register, because from that you're going to have that coordination. And you're going to be able to build strength if you can hear that one of the two things is weaker. So a little bit of context on some of this terminology. There have been others that have ventured to try and classify sounds and registers using different terms. The first was Dr. Harry Holeen in 1974. Now, at one time, there was quite a discrepancy amongst scientists whether registers even existed at all. But as technology has gotten better and voice scientists have more advanced tools to analyze the voice, such as spectrographs and stroboscopy, there's much more of a consensus that registers do exist. Some people still will say, oh, there's 5, there's 6, there's 10, there's 1. But the general idea is that there are these two registers and then this blend. Now, if we go back to Dr. Harry Holeen's terms from 1974, he used the terms loft, modal, and pulse. Now I'm going to work from the bottom up. So pulse is what we would consider fry. That would be that fry sound. It's generally not pitch specific, though you can learn to incorporate that sort of a sound on pitches, but it's that bottom most if you just keep going down in your range until you get to pretty much nothing and no audible pitch. And it just kind of creaks out. So that's what we, for somatic voice work purposes, will call fry. The next term was modal. Now, Dr. Holeen said that this was your normally used in speaking and singing, and it was their normal or regular sound. The problem with this is that depending on the person, they may not speak in just one register. A lot of women, they used to speak here and have this slightly more head register dominant sound. So this would be a totally different register than someone else that was speaking here. So we will talk about modal in terms of chest register. So that's that really full sound. And then loft, which was originally coined to describe falsetto, those really high, light pitches. For our purposes, we'll refer to that as head voice, which is the same in males and females in terms of what's physiologically happening in the throat. And that sounds like this. Just to give you some different vowels, but they all are here. It's a very different sound than where I typically speak. I speak in chest register. If you are reading research that's been done on the voice, on registration, it's important to remember that the research done on singers is often done on local people who are available. A lot of studies are academic, so the subjects are often college students or faculty. These subjects are not generally vetted by anyone other than the person who is conducting this study, and the subjects are often classical singers. So remember that in this country, up until recently, the majority of voice programs out there, even if they were musical theater programs, the faculty was dominated by singers who had classical, operatic, choral training. And as such, a lot of the students were also either classical students, sometimes musical theater students. But with the research, if you have a ton of students and you don't know what sounds they're making, and it says, oh yes, this was chest register, you don't really know if you don't have a sound to hear what they're doing. So just remember that a lot of that research is subjective, and until very recently, there wasn't really any research done on high-level professionals. You know, in a best case scenario, if we're talking about research on classical singers, we'd love to have audio examples and have someone from the Met say, yes, that is the sound that we're hiring to be at the Metropolitan Opera. Because then you know, and you have some sort of context that that is actually the sound that they're saying that it is. Vocal mechanics. So the voice should respond in certain ways at certain pitches and intensities without conscious manipulation by the singer. Now this is also dictated in some way to the pitch defaults. So you really want to make sure you memorize those and look at that pitch parameter chart so you know if you're working with a tenor such as Billy, you know, what if I'm in this part of his range, what sound should I expect to come out? And if I'm asking for something different, there's a pretty good chance I'm not going to get it, especially if he was a beginner student and didn't have a lot of technical prowess. He would just give me whatever happened, and it may not be what I'm asking for if I'm in the wrong area of his range to be asking for it. So in that same vein, we talk about default position, and we want to, whether we want to change the default position is, you know, depends, but we want to know what our singer's default position is. And the default is the sound that they make without any warm-up or preparation and without any conscious thought. I have a lot of singers that I'll ask them to do an exercise and they'll say, well, how do you want me to sing it? Do you want me to mix it? Do you want me to belt it? What do you want me to do? And I have to remind them, I just want you to do it. Don't think about it. Just give me this exercise, keep it at a medium volume, and just do this vowel and just go and see what comes out. And a lot of us as singers are very rarely given that option because everything that we're doing is always going through some sort of stylistic filter. But when we're working technically and we're working on building a foundation and building registers, we want to know what sound comes out of them naturally without them having to think at all so that they can just sing. Trinice had used the term vanilla voice last year at the Institute, which I really loved, that just, I don't want anything fancy. Just, I want to know what you sound like, not you through a classical filter or you through a musical theater filter, but just you, just sing. So that's the default position. And depending on what the student gives you and what they're ultimately looking for, then you can, as a teacher, say, all right, well, you gave me that's a great sound, super head register dominant. Maybe we want to work to bring in a little bit more chest register if your goal is to sing musical theater and sing belty material. Sorry, my mouse fell, slid off. So our job as teachers, working with registers, working with a student, it's our job to create that register balance, and we do that using exercises that ask for a specific pitch, vowel, volume, and duration. That's it. Any combination of those things can give you all of the sounds that we're looking for, but it's our job as teachers to come up with that exercise and then to guide the student to exercise it correctly. We want to make sure that the student is doing the best that they can. So if they're really struggling, maybe changing the exercise slightly, making it simpler. If they're close, let the exercise go. Sometimes it's really easy to get nitpicky. So you want to make sure that they're executing it correctly, but without the goal of perfection initially, because the goal is to have them do the exercise and let the exercise do the job. And then we want to make sure, is the exercise doing its job? And if not, it's not because the student's not trying to do it correctly. Maybe it was a poor explanation on our part. Maybe we need to come up with a different exercise because for whatever reason, their throat's just not responding to that exercise that we gave them. A lot of people will say, oh, I want you to find your mix, or I want to do mix. And that's a really difficult request if someone doesn't have mix or doesn't know what mix is. So if we have register balance and there's good chest register and good head register, mix eventually is just going to show up. And it's our job as the teacher to say, yes, that's the sound we want. That is mix. So we give it a name, we give it a label, and then the student's able to replicate it and practice it on purpose. But if they've never made that sound before, they have no idea what it is that you're asking. They've heard it in other people, but they don't know how it works in their body. So our job is not to ask them to find it or do it. It's to label it once they've already made that sound and then work from there. Students' job is just to do the exercises. That's it. They just do the exercises and everything else is our responsibility. In working with registers as the primary tool of somatic voice work, we want to isolate, separate, develop, strengthen, and coordinate chest register and head register until there is a mix of both. The reasoning for this is, as musical theater singers, for myself, since I'm a musical theater singer, we are often asked to sing in specific register qualities on specific pitches. Billy had mentioned SpongeBob, which is a great example because your males singers have to, if they want to audition for this particular role, they need to sing up high, belting, A5, not A5, sorry, A4, A above middle C, while skateboarding and playing guitar at the same time. So they're being asked not just for a range, but specific qualities on those ranges. And unless we isolate and work on them individually, it's kind of hard to know how to do that. It also, by understanding that register balance and vowel sound quality, it gives us as singers and our students as singers the tools to address certain creative requests. Unfortunately, people in the music business, whether they are your producers or in a recording studio situation or a music director, regular director, they often don't have voice-specific training. So they don't know how to ask for what they're looking for in a way that makes sense to us. They might say, it needs to be more sultry, make it sexy. Or, I want it to be a little wispier and, more ethereal. Those things don't necessarily mean anything, but if we have a lot of tools in our belt to come up with like, all right, well, maybe they meant they want it to have, less volume and breathy and more head register. We can start to try to address those creative requests and give them some options until they say, oh yeah, that's what it was I was looking for. So it just gives us more tools. Belting, such a big box to unfold. It is one of the only words that can be used in many different parts of speech. I'm a belter, belting out a song. I like Jeannie's example in the text that you would never say, I'm a classicalizer, classicling a classical song. It just makes no sense. But I can say I'm a belter belting out a song, and everyone's like, oh yeah, no, I got that. But what is belt? Belting is a chest register dominant sound sung above the break at a loud volume. Now, not all chest register is belting, but belting is chest register. And that quality that we associate when we hear it and go, yeah, that's a belt, usually kicks in around the A above middle C. Belting is loud. It's bright and trumpet-like. Those are terms that the industry coined. If you are working with a belter, you often will not hear a transition into head voice or head register being super smooth. It may not happen at all because they've trained their voices to do nothing but chest voice up into the rafters pitch-wise. So if you have someone who comes in that's a professional belter and you don't hear it transitioning smoothly, or it doesn't transition at all, that is not uncommon. It often doesn't happen with a high-level belter. In that same vein, belting can be just what comes out by itself. It can be a singer's default, or it can be a choice. For someone who sings a lot of different types of music and really kind of capitalizes on the fact that they're in a big band and then they're also in a rock band and they sometimes do theater on the side, but they also sing with their church choir. They probably they might have a lot of options in terms of what sounds they make. So belting could just be one of them. And that's also why it's important when someone says, like, well, how do you want me to sing? Just sing. Give me your default. I've heard the term twang sometimes referred, like belting is called twang, and I don't know where that came from because twang is a country term. It refers to country music. It has its roots in country music, and the term that industry professionals use on Broadway when they're talking about belting is brassy. So just remember, brassy is Broadway belting. Good belters, they're not always belting. They have other sounds that they can make for different emotional responses. A mix in a belter could be non-existent. You might ask them, hey, get quieter, and they could just give you quiet chest. That is 100% possible. It's possible for a man to be a belter. Billy had brought this up as well in his presentation. If you're singing chest dominant up above where your break is, whether you're male or female, you would be considered to be belting if you're loud and in chest up high. Loud sounds in head register, even with very bright vowels, are not authentic belting. Now, I had it was one of my teachers in high school. I don't think it was my choir teacher, but one of the teachers I had for like a show choir thing to solve, us singing a belty song without belting. They'd be like, oh, you just need to make it a little bit more nasal. Just make it bright. And you didn't just get nasal head register, If I'm singing like this, that's not belting. It's still really heady. Not what we would say, oh yeah, that's belting. So just remember that if you're changing the resonance, that doesn't change the function. And belting chest register is a function, so you can only change that function by addressing what is the larynx doing, not all of the rest of this. It's important to remember that the voice is only indirectly controllable in an average person. So bringing it back to that pitch, vowel, volume, duration, I can ask my dad, who doesn't sing at all, to say, hey, give me an ah, comfortably loud, in a low part of your voice. He could do that. He doesn't know a thing about singing. He's never trained as a singer, but he can do that. That's super easy. If I start saying, I want you to, open the back of your throat and make a nice, open, big sound, and have it be, bombacious or something. He's going to look at me like I have two heads. It's not a reasonable request. Now, a lot of us as singers, we have learned to interpret some very creative requests even by teachers that use a lot of imagery and have over the years in our back of our heads kind of translated what someone means if they say, have it come out the top of your head like a bird, like there's an imaginary string pulling up. I've had teachers tell me that, and I think I know what they're asking for. At least I was able to make a sound and they said that that's what they wanted, so I guess I did okay. But if you're working with a singer and you want to give really clear directives, and remember that if they are asked for a pitch, vowel, volume, and duration, they're going to be able to do that. There's very few nerve receptors in the back of our mouth, in our throat, base of our tongue, soft palate. If you're an advanced singer who's worked for many, many years and has gained some sort of kinesthetic awareness, you can probably move those things. But in the average person and in the majority of the singers that I've worked with, both college kids and professionals, most of them don't have control over that. And then they sit there and I think I'm moving it. I think it's bigger, but it's really hard because there's no nerves back there. The internal movements arise over time through exercises on their own, unless they're deliberately suppressed. Now, when you're working in chest register, especially if it's a singer who maybe this is new for them and they haven't really worked chest register, it makes noise, and that's okay. It means that things are moving, means that it's working, especially if they're at a volume level. If you have someone who doesn't speak very loudly normally, so now you're asking him to be loud and down low in chest, it's probably going to make noise. The noise diminishes over time, and it's balanced by head register. Now, how do you distinguish the noise that you want from the noise that you don't want? How do you know if the noise that they're making is the noise that's okay? It's years of experience in listening, and I'd say also checking in with your student. If I hear noise in one of my students when they're singing down there, I'll check in and say, hey, how was that? What's going on? And they're like, I don't know. I mean, it feels fine. It's easy, but it's really noisy. That's probably an okay noise. If they visually look like they're straining, or they say like, wow, that was really hard, that didn't feel good, that's also a good way of saying, okay, that's probably a noise I don't want. Let's back off a little. The throat's not ready for it. But if everything is otherwise okay and you're checking in with them, chest register could be a little noisy. Working with the tongue, you might get a little noise as well. If the tongue is really tight, when it releases, it might make a noise. It also could feel kind of strange. It might scare the student. That's okay. Just let them know, like, that's the muscle releasing. It was really tight. We forget that the tongue is a muscle. If your calf is tight and you get a massage and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, it's so loose. I mean, we have a lot more awareness of that being something that can be tight, or a knot in your shoulder. But the tongue, especially if there's, if it's tight all the time, it's habitually tight even when they speak. If it finally releases, that could be a very strange sensation. So just remind them that, it's okay. And the noise also will go away relatively quickly when it's related to the tongue. And when we're working with head register, some of the things we can encounter, remember there's two phrases, and someone asked a question in the previous session about a student having a breathy sound in that B4 to E5 middle voice range. That, as Jeannie said, that's really, really common. It doesn't have to be breathy, but a good chunk of students, especially if they're not used to singing in head register and they're singing what they hear on the radio all day long, it is a safe assumption that if it's breathy, it's just because it's not getting used a whole ton and it needs a little bit more exercise, which we do with exercises in head register. And then we'll get this really nice crystal clear sound. We don't want the head register to be pulled back. So if they're singing and it's like this, I'm really relaxed. I actually kind of just made myself yawn a little bit. But it's so relaxed that everything's pulled. So and you don't want them to try to be in head and do that like, I'm trying to get it out and squeeze it out thing. So it's interesting to find that balance between how relaxed do we want them to be. And Jeannie touched on this a little bit in her answer as well earlier. think buoyancy, think lift. I tell my students have energy. Most of my students can do a siren. Woo! Really easy, really clear, without any issue. And then they go to sing even in part of that pitch range and stuff changes. So I just remind them, like, keep that same energy along with everything being relaxed, the tongue and jaw and whatnot. So thank you so much. That's my segment on registers and belting, and I will pass it back to Jeannie now.
Thank
All
you.
right.
That was great. I think that Amanda covered all those topics very well. If you have questions, you're certainly welcome to put them in the chat room. And when we get to the end, we will hopefully have a little time to answer your questions on Amanda's segment and on mine. And then after mine, we'll have Trinice. We should have some time for questions. We are giving you an awful lot of information today, like we're cramming it into you. We chose to do that because we feel that the breakouts that you're going to do tomorrow will be better and more effective if you are prepared with information in the back of your mind as to why we're going to do stuff. So now I'm going to pick up and talk with you about voice science and formants a little bit so that we get that off our plate. It's important to understand enough about voice science so that you are comfortable with it. Unless you're going to do voice science, you don't have to necessarily know more than that. But it would be good to at least be vaguely familiar in case you ever read an article in which somebody was doing research and you thought, I don't understand this. So I'm going to walk you through this as simply, I guess is the best word, as possible. And so, Billy, if you would please bring up the vocal fold slide.
Great. Just give me 1 second.
Okay.
Jeannie, I think you might have accidentally muted yourself.
Okay. So, Billy, I don't see the slide. Is it up?
Yeah, sorry, I was getting you to unmute yourself. Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Did you close anything?
No. Okay, that's good. Okay, so you have to forgive my shaky hand here. I probably could have gone online to find better examples than this, but I usually draw this on the whiteboard in the classroom. I didn't think about it until very recently. So this is the best that I can do. A sine wave is a measurement that they use in science, which is that pulse going across the pitch above and below at a regular interval. And so when we're talking about a sine wave, we have this, and this is one cycle where this is from here to here, okay? And we call this a single cycle. And in this illustration, we're using this as a template for vocal folds. It's used for other things too. This would be as the vocal folds open and as they close, and as they open and as they close, and as they open and as they close, as they open and as they close. So on A440, A above middle C, that vibration would happen 440 times a second. This many things here 440 times in a second. So one of these is 1/440th. And obviously that's much too small and too fast for us to see with the naked eye. The ratio of opening and closing is changeable. And so this is a voice science thing you need to know, because you will hear about open and closed quotients. Open and closed quotients measure the proportion of time the vocal folds are functioning within the 440th cycle. Okay? So when we talk about a long open quotient, typically that's head register. And so here you see that the vocal folds are opening, and then they close, and then they're open, and then close. Open, and close. Open, close. So we call this a long open quotient because they're open more than they're closed, and that actually allows more air to go out because they're not closed together. The closed quotient is the reverse. So they're close, open, 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 open. Proportionately, this is a longer closed quotient, and therefore less air gets out. And so in these ingredients, we have the remeasurement of the subglottic pressure. Remember, I told you that's one of the measurements, and this is how long are the vocal folds closed in these micro-millisecond measurements, and what is the amount of air below the vocal folds as they start to vibrate or as phonation begins. And these are louder, more pressed sounds, so typically we associate these with chest register. And so when someone's talking about a closed quotient of 50%, it's kind of talking about mix. You know, it's not more long or more closed, it's open, close, open, close, open, close. And the vocal folds, if you saw them, if you took them out of the throat, they close from the bottom to the top in a wave. So this is the contact, this is the closure, and then they open again. And this is called a wave, and what's waving is the mucosa, that's the outer lining of the vocal folds. And I think you're going to get more of that tomorrow from our speech pathology lecture by Barbara Wilson Arbolita. I made this diagram during our break. This is to give you an orientation. If you were looking at vocal folds, the top one is head and the bottom one is chest. And so you have to get a perspective about this. Imagine that we cut my head in half and took the front half away. And then we went to my larynx and we blew my vocal folds up 1,000,000 times so that they were big. In head register, the vocal folds close and vibrate more or less only on the upper part. And because they have a depth, the rest of it is falling away, so it's really just this vibration at the top. In chest register, it's the whole thing vibrating. So that is illustrated here. You can find this in a number of voice books. Dr. McCoy has it in his book. Dr. Mary Beth Bunch-Dame has it in her book. And this is also part of the open-closed quotient and the airflow parameters. Belting is pressed phonation. It's quite tightly pressed. Therefore, it's not a lot of air moving out. And when you start the sound, the breath pressure is high. So it's a high subglottic pressure, low flow sound. And it's important to understand that because you don't want to say to somebody who's belting, oh, just relax and let the breath go, dear, because you can't do that when you're belting. It doesn't go out. And this is the reason why it's easy to hold a note for a long time if there's a lot of resistance, and that's called glottal resistance. The glottis is the open space between the vocal folds. It's the only open space in the body that has a name. So when it's firmly closed, the air doesn't get out quite so much. And of course, the little puffs of movement, the air is going out in those puffs. And that's the vibration. Now, that's like the world's fastest, cheapy version of how that works. If there's any voice scientists listening, I I apologize. Okay, now we're going to do the same thing with breathing. We're going to go quickly. I'm sure that those of you who are experienced teachers of singing will have a good way of explaining breathing that your students learn and understand and that it works. How is it possible that there's so many different ways for people to teach breathing and mostly they work? It's because of the way we each experience our bodies somatically. It's always different. If you are a tall, willowy soul with a beautiful, tall body like a fashion model, I don't think you experience being in a physical form the same way as a little Italian lady who's almost as wide as she is tall. I don't feel it the same way now at 71 as I did when I was 31. So the relationship that you have to your rib cage, to your belly, to the muscles that move and how and where they're moving, in your whole upper body mechanism where the lungs are, is yours. So we can explain breathing to a student, and then we can watch them, we can look at their bodies, and we can ask them to learn to feel in a more specific way. So on page, I don't know if it's 35 or 36, because I think we have one page off in this particular page counting. My pages are different than the ones we've been listening. But it's the section 4, and it's called breathing. So whatever page, 35, 36, it's in there. And you can see correct alignment of the posture is that you have to stack yourself up. Normally I would take you through that, but I don't think I'm going to do that right now because I want to get through the rest of this stuff. You're going to inhale so that the upper body remains open, lifted, not collapsed, not dropped, open, but also that the inhalation goes down into the torso toward the floor, and the expansion is in the area of the belly. Then you have to learn to keep the rib cage open while you're exhaling, which is bizarre. It's like standing on your head. Ribs don't do that. Ribs go up and out, and they go down and in. So keeping your rib cage in an open position while you exhale is weird. But so is playing a violin. So is being a ballet dancer and lifting your leg up into the sky. Lots of things we do in life that are high skill things are not normal, like everybody walking on the sidewalk could just do. This is part of cultivating technical skill, in this case, breath control, breath management. And so it helps just have a strong sense of the intercostal muscles between the ribs and all the abdominal muscles, especially the one in the front, the rectus abdominis, but also the obliques. And then that engages your back over time. Now, the goal is to take deep breath followed by deep breath followed by deep breath, and then to control the amount of time that you are exhaling. And as you run out of breath, the sound would just automatically get softer because there's less lung pressure, less air in your lungs, therefore the pressure level goes down. And so people who don't know anything about breathing, and if they take a breath, when they take it, it's very loud, and if they just keep talking and the breath runs out, when they get to the end, it's soft. And then they talk loud again, and then they keep talking and they don't take another breath, and it gets soft. So when you're singing, sometimes a phrase goes the other way. It might start out very quietly, and then as you're getting louder, you're going to the end, and by the time you get to the end, that's really loud. You have to have control over the pressure. Now, the abdominal muscles press on the viscera. That's all the organs that are in there, in that middle place. Your stomach and your spleen and your intestine, blah, blah, all this, whatever's in there. And then above that is the big bowl of the diaphragm, which is stretched down because the ribs are open. So the outside presses on the inside, which presses on the above, and that bowl of the diaphragm is above that is the lungs. So it's like a bagpipe. The bagpipe guy with his arm is going and of course the less air in the bagpipe, the more he's got to press with his arm. So for us, if we're going to continue a long phrase and keep the breath going and then get louder as we have less, Where we press is on the abdominal muscles. Now, you want to get esoteric and say, well, I push out. No, I push in. No, I push down. Well, I push down and out. I push down and in, up and down. And then my ribs are, oh, my back muscles. Okay, good. Any and all of those could be okay. It really depends on the person and what they're doing and on how much you work on sustaining the breath to get longer and how coordinated that is. And then as soon as you make a voiced sound, that is, a sound is not from being restricted from the lips, like s or sh or z. As soon as you, well, that one has a voice in it, but s. As soon as you do something that requires sound, the vocal fold open-close quotient is going to affect how much air goes out. That's called transglottal airflow. And so if I sing, you can do this at home. If you're not muted, you should be, but you can do this. Just take a breath and deliberately sing a kind of ugly nasal sound. Ah, and just see how long it lasts. That's it. Thank you. You're probably still doing it. Okay, stop. Now, deliberately do something that's very breathy and light. And see how long it lasts. Okay. Now, I did not ask you to change what you were doing in your abdominal muscles or any other part of your body, but maybe you noticed that there was a different reaction in your body as you did those. Okay. So this is what it means to say the vocal folds control the airflow. It doesn't mean you shouldn't have control over your ribs and your belly and eventually over your back muscles and your legs and your position of your torso. That all comes along with for the ride. But this is also why it depends what you sing. So if you're a jazz singer and all you ever sing is this sound, you don't have to do a lot with breath support, especially if you have a mic, right? So when you say this, it's people, jazz singers come in a lot and say, well, I don't understand breath support, or I don't understand breathing. Well, how loud do you sing? Well, not that loud. Oh, well, guess what? Why do you have any reason to understand breathing then? You don't. It's the opera singers, it's the Broadway belters, it's the country singers who are singing loud, the gospel singers who are singing loud. The loudness, the volume, requires a connected behavior in the abdominal muscles that pressurizes the air, like when you go to the dentist and the air goes tss, tss. That's pressurized air. Just leaving yourself alone and exhaling however you do, you don't need to do much with your belly and your ribs. So of course with the jazz singers I work to make them very belty and loud, and they hate it. They don't want to sound like that. And I said, no, just an exercise. Just an exercise. But I like my sound like this. It's so nice. This is my sound. I said, good. I like that too. Now I'll go, ah. Well, they love me. But it works because that's how they get connected to what's going on in their bodies, right? Okay, so now, if you're a couch potato and you don't sing much, and then you start to teach, you're the example for your student. So if your breathing is lousy and disconnected and not coordinated, and you only sing softly, or you only sing low, or you only sing high, unless you assume that everybody is as limited as you are, did you really say that? Yeah, I did. Then that's not really being a high-level professional elite teacher, because you're the example. A lot of this process we learn by auditory example. When you're 2 years old, around then is when you learn to talk. And how you learn to talk is you listen to the adults and then you repeat. So usually your parents, but maybe your grandparents, maybe your daycare person, and you know, this is doggy, doggy, good, kitty, kitty. Right? Whatever that setup is that you get it through your ears. So as teachers of singing, we want to be able to give good examples. On the other hand, you don't want to just make the sound so the student thinks they have to sound like you. No, they have to do what you're doing functionally. And that's why it's the same for teaching men and women. I get a lot of comments, how do you work with a man? The same way you work with a woman. How do you work with a kid? The same way you work with an adult, but with adjusted parameters. And Michelle will talk about that. Okay. Now, there's a section called Tone Quality Adjustment Describing the Voice. And on my book, it's on page 40. Might not be on 40 for you, but close. And
They're one page ahead of you because they have an extra page.
okay, so you're probably on 41. Now, this is from a book that was written by the late Dr. Daniel Boone, who was an eminent speech pathologist in the United States. He wrote many of the early speech pathology textbooks. And this is from his book, Is Your Voice Telling on You?, which is still available from Plural Publishing, and that's in your bibliography at the end of this chapter. The Eskimos have 40 words for snow. Tells you something. In English, we don't have very many words that describe voiced sound. Very few. And you really have to think about it. When we talk about voice subjectively, almost all the words that are in Dr. Boone's list could be used to describe the sound subjectively. So that means that it might mean something to me that it does not mean to you. And that's why those terms are very difficult when you're teaching technique. They're okay if you're teaching artistic expression, because that's a different thing. So when you say it's a warm sound, what is a warm sound? When you say it's a full sound, what is a full sound? How do you know what that is? You don't. So the teacher hopefully can make that sound. They go, well, this is what we call a full sound, and then they make it. And then the student goes, oh. But if you say, well, this is what we call the green sound, and then they sing something, it's not helping the student, even if they learn how to make your version of a green sound. And then if they go out in the world and they start singing and go, oh, I'm going to use my green sound, everybody's going to go, oh, okay, really good. But the terms in somatic voice work, chest, head, mix, bright vowels, dark vowels, in the music industry, most people understand them. So it makes you able to communicate with the music business, but it also allows you to communicate with other people who teach in a generic way. You don't need, 39 versions of sound, and no voice teacher on earth has invented any sounds. If you have a baby, they make every sound that we make as people. Nobody has invented any belting or mixing. Those are sounds that human beings make all over the planet. So anybody who's a teacher says, well, I discovered these sounds and we do this. Run away, run away, run away. That's nonsense. All right. Functional listening is on page 42 for you. When you are learning to listen, you will learn to listen for several different components in the sound. And you will be evaluating those components functionally. And we are going to give you a chance to learn what that means tomorrow and the next day on Monday. I'll try to give you some examples, but of course we're hindered by electronics. You hearing me in a room would be different than you hearing me through my microphone and your earphones. But we've already alluded to this. Amanda gave you some examples, and Trinice is going to give you some more when I'm done. But if we talk about the sound, one of the things we want to take a look at is what's the difference between what I'm doing functionally, which anybody can learn to do, and how I sound while I do it.
Jeannie, 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'm a flute. This machine is a flute. So if I'm doing this and somebody else next to me is an oboe, they could be playing the same pitch and making the same quality, but they're going to sound like a different timbre because an oboe is a bigger, longer tube. Okay? So it takes a while to sort out what the voice itself is as an instrument from what the voice is doing. So if I'm working with anybody whose voice is like mine, and of course lyric sopranos are a dime a dozen, unfortunately, but coincidentally, Betsy and Michelle are also lyric sopranos. Mason's a lyric soprano. Amanda's a lyric soprano. Amanda's voice is a little bit on the fuller side of lyric soprano. But, you know, that matters because when I make the sound of chest, it's still coming through the flute sound, right? So, ah, yeah, 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 yeah. How are you today? That's chest register. And here, yeah, 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 yeah. How are you today? That's head. Now, if I go in the middle, my left vocal fold doesn't like it, but I'll try. How are you today? How are you today? How are you today? I'm not very good. My throat wants to crack. This is my mix sound. That's not head register. And it's not chesty belty. Okay? So functional listening means that you could hear the difference of those sounds, and you would also hear that I still sound like a lyric soprano. Maybe I sound like a crotchety old lady too. I don't know. That my voice sometimes makes noise. And if I had anyone else do this, they could learn to do the same gestures, the same functional responses. But if their instrument was a different kind, anatomically different, then that would change how the end product sounds. And you have to learn the difference. And it takes a while in terms of listening. So we don't expect you, especially if this is brand new to you, when you go to the breakouts. If you don't get this, it's okay. Patience. You can ask a lot of the faculty. They didn't get it at first either. Some did, but a lot didn't. And it's okay if you don't. One of the things that I would do if we were in person, which I can't do here, is I would have you partner up with each other, and one person would speak and the other person would listen. And then you would switch, and the person who was listening would speak. And then you talk to each other after it's over about what happened. And you can do this at home with your partners or anyone who's living in your same home, and just sit and have them talk to you for 2 minutes about what they did this morning or what they did for lunch. And you don't get to say anything. You can nod your head, but you're not allowed to respond. And you will find that that's very difficult. We do not actually really listen very much. Listening as in paying attention, being present, being in front of the person and receiving what they're saying without thinking, what am I going to say about that? Maybe I should make a comment. Well, that was a stupid thing to say. Well, what does that mean? But just being there quietly and allowing the person to talk and you listen without saying anything. And actually, I've done this exercise where I don't even have the people who are listening show anything on their face. They just have to look benign. And you want to talk about a room full of people who sing and teach singing and having them be neutral for 2 whole minutes. You could see the temperature in the room goes up because they're like, oh, it's so hard. It's hard. But that's your job when you're teaching. Shut up and listen, okay? But yeah, boca chiusa. Because if you're busy going blah, blah, blah in your head, you're not actually, you might miss something. And some of the changes in the beginning that people make are very small. And I would love it if you could work with this in terms of listening. And just don't respond. Just listen and be quiet. because that is a really key ingredient in being able to diagnose and to teach. All right, now I have like 3 minutes. If anybody has a question, Michelle, now's the time.
Jeannie, would you like to do the section that Trinice is going to help you with dysfunction and constriction first, or do you want to do questions?
I'll take like 1 or maybe 2 questions, and then Trinice will take over.
Okay.
And then when she's done, I'm going to come back in with what vocal exercises can and cannot do.
Okay. So a couple of questions that we had from this section. We'll go back to the beginning here. Is it possible for the vocal cords to overlap? I've heard that the buzziness can be from overlap, but I've also heard that disproven, and would love to hear how you understand that buzziness to occur.
There is something called asymmetric vocal fold movement, which is not necessarily overlapping. That's different because that would be a vertical height difference in the fold closure. That can happen too, but that's more unusual. So if the folds are in sync, then we hear a pitch, clean pitch. But if you're like me, where you have one vocal fold that vibrates and then it goes like spasmy, and then maybe it goes back, because my high voice doesn't do that. That little spasmy thing is where the vocal fold is no longer waving in a regular motion, and that creates noise. And so that is a side effect of asymmetrical vocal fold motion. Sometimes one vocal fold gets out of sync with the other. That can happen too. Sometimes it's a neurological issue. And then the sound is also noisy or unstable. So there's all kinds of things that can impact the vocal folds, some of which don't have anything to do with how we sing or speak, but they have a biological or neurological cause. Anything else, Betsy?
Okay, here's another quick question. What is your take on pharyngeal singing, or singing on the edge of the chord when teaching belting?
I refuse to answer on the grounds that it may incriminate me. My answer to that is la 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 la. No. No. I don't think that is useful. I don't think it's necessary. I don't understand why anybody would do that. There was in the classical training a school for a while, years ago, that was about pharyngeal resonance and using the pharyngeal resonance as a boost to the sound, and that might make a little more sense to me. But if you're on the upper edges of the vocal folds, you're in some form of head. Maybe you could manipulate the resonance of the sound, but then that's borderline in terms of function, and I wouldn't teach that as a basic function. If you go back and listen to somebody like Angela Lansbury, who taught herself to sing, who was a belter, I don't think she's doing anything with the edges of her vocal folds in her pharynx. If you're talking about that weird sound that Steven Tyler makes, yeah, maybe that, but then he has blown out his vocal folds a number of times, so maybe that's not such a good idea. All right, I think we will now go to the next section. Is Dr. Trinice Robinson Martin, and she's going to pick up with something called dysfunction constriction, which is on page 44.
Hello,
Trinice?
everyone. Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Jeannie. As mentioned earlier in the LoVetri Institute, we are here to teach you all how to think diagnostically, functionally, and both with compassion and empathy for your students and the learning process. So nurturing this quality in your own teaching style centers around your ability to recognize and acknowledge the possible issues that you'll encounter with your students. And most importantly, be able to address these issues in a non-judgmental manner. So let's start by exploring the concept of dysfunction. On page 44 of your course packet, you will find a list of problems that affect the singing voice. I find it useful in my own teaching to organize these issues into 3 broad categories. Cognitive issues, meaning issues that are centered around how we think, or how we perceive our environment or situations. Physiological issues, which are centered around physical limitations in the body. Style-related issues that are centered around being able to execute certain style requirements. It's important to recognize that although I will be presenting these categories as separate phenomena, they are interrelated. So let's start first by exploring physiological issues. Physiological issues, again, are centered around physical limitations or complications in the body. In your voice studio, they may appear in many forms. These can include lack of strength, lack of stamina or endurance in your student's ability to be able to maintain certain sounds, lack of flexibility or agility, so their voice may be rigid. They may be innately hypofunctional, meaning underfunctional, or hyperfunctional, like always moving and always overdoing. You might see this in the form of a lack in vocal range. You might see this in the form of lack of volume. You also might see this, and will see this guaranteed, in the form of a lack of coordination. And that can be both in terms of register breaks or in the coordination of breathing. Something a little more complicated is addressing the cognitive issues. Cognitive issues center around how we think or perceive our environment or a situation. This is much more complicated to address in the voice studios because there's so many degrees of complications that can appear. They include anything from just lack of awareness to the body and to the voice, like they just don't know what to look for. You can look at lack of listening skills, which means that they just don't really know what they're listening for in order to create some sort of intellectual skill, like that as an intellectual skill, I'm meaning lack of expressiveness in the voice. Like they just have difficulty putting emotion in the sound itself. Some of the more complicated components include emotional or psychological blocks. Whether or not the student knows these things exist or not, you as a voice teacher need to recognize and be aware that these components are real and affect the singing voice and its development. And they include everything from emotional and psychological trauma, things that you might have grown up with, from people saying that you can't sing, from being abused or being told to shut up, things that just collapse the voice, traumatic experiences in life. So I've had a student that had a problem with deep breathing because she almost drowned when she was young. I had another student that was molested and had a problem with opening their mouth. So that's physical or verbal abuse. That's a real thing. Or you can just have the self-esteem issues as I'm not good enough, I can't do it. And therefore these mental things are impeding on a physical response. As a voice teacher, you are not required to address these matters in your studio with your students. However, as I said before, you need to be aware that these components are real and that they affect the singing voice and their development. Let's explore a few style-related issues. Now, this list that I'm going to show you is not exhaustive, but it is intended to help you organize your diagnosis, particularly when it's based on style characteristics. So some of the things that you might find that you need to address in your student is lack of vibrato. And that's in the style category because there are some genres that don't require vibrato. And many people are saying, I need to take my vibrato out. So that's a stylistic thing. Lack of tonal beauty. And that's, again, a perceptual measure that is dependent upon the genre that you're looking for. Maybe lack of resonance. And of course, the lack of rhythmic sense, which is much more apparent in terms of certain styles in which rhythmic sense and feel are heavily dependent. Let's move into the concept of constriction. Constriction is a muscular behavior that you will have to address regardless of the category of dysfunction you're addressing. Many physiological dysfunctional issues you will encounter will require the release of the constrictor muscles in some way. Cognitive issues typically manifest themselves in the constriction of the throat as a protective mechanism, fight or flight. When you are scared, when you are nervous, when you are unsure, the first thing that happens is your throat closes, you get choked up if you're overly emotional. So these are certain aspects that if you're not understanding and are you're aware that there are physical responses to these what might seem non-related utterances, then you're going to be misdiagnosing and trying to address some things that are not relevant at that particular moment. You might be wondering what muscles are involved in constricting behaviors. The constrictor muscles and the tongue are the primary muscles that we are looking towards, that their function is to narrow the throat, and they're in order to help you swallow. The constrictor muscles surround the back of the throat. If you look closely at the image on the screen, you'll see that the constrictor muscles on the left-hand side of the screen are a set of 3 muscles. Those muscles include the upper set, which is referred to as the superior or upper constrictors. They're behind the mouth, so you can take a moment to watch the picture, see where the lips are, where the cheeks are, and then going back before the ears. That's about the level of the superior constrictor muscles. The middle constrictor muscles are located more to the back of the tongue. So again, looking at the picture, you see the person's chin, you can follow it back through and you can approximate where the middle constrictor muscles are. Lastly, the lower constrictor muscles are the muscles that are centered more so around the larynx. If you see in the picture again, the thyroid cartilage and the inferior or lower constrictor muscles are situated behind those. We have all of these muscles in the throat, plus the massive tongue muscle, which is pictured on the right, that we are constantly trying to address in terms of creating a freer voice that has lots of options and creativity and freedom of colors. As teachers, we must understand that not only is constriction the most vocal problem, but we need to recognize the variations of how these constrictors are unintentionally or intentionally sometimes used to affect the sound. For example, if I want to talk like this would be my constricted voice, or I can sing like this in the same place. Or I can sing like this, and this would still be a very constricted place. Or I could sing like this, and this would still be a constricted space. So in learning that, sometimes how we listen, how we perceive constriction isn't always as overt as, oh my gosh, right? And we have to recognize that there are these variations. And also we must recognize how these variations are created. Where's the location of these responses in relationship to the sound that you're hearing? If I'm talking like this, I need to know where is that. As a teacher, I'm trying to figure out where is that constriction being blocked. If it's like this, I need to know where is this constriction happening so that I can be more deliberate in my diagnosis and again addressing the issue. All singing styles require singers to adjust their vocal tract in effort to enhance certain harmonic, acoustic, or vocal sounds. The key, though, is understanding the difference between contracting these muscles with the intention of affecting the sound temporarily and getting stuck in a muscular contraction in a manner that you cannot freely and easily release those muscles at will. This is an A6, A5. So I'm contracting and releasing those muscles at will as determined by the sound that I'm hoping to create. The fact that I can easily move in and out of these throat shapes is an indication that this setup is indeed a choice and not a behavior that causes me to be stuck. True, there are some singing styles that require a greater level of constriction in order for the sound to be viable. But as a singing teacher, you want to know and be able to assess, well, how much is actually required for this sound to be viable for this person that I'm working with? How long are they going to be singing in this particular sound? How long are they going to be using the sound? What are the effects? And also, what else does that singer have to do? So, and I mean that stylistically. So I can't make a singer say, all you gotta do is sound like this because you wanna sing. No, I can't allow a singer to sing it with that particular vocal strategy if they are wanting to go ahead and change completely into a different style. Because if you sing in one of anything, as many of you classical singers might have figured, you've been singing classical all your life, classical styles, and then you're trying to switch, and it's hard to readjust how you position your throat. You need to be able to teach people in a way that they're going to be flexible if that is their desire. If that is their desire and they want to be, they want to have a sense of the smorgasbord of colors that they can create. So thank you for listening. I tried to move so we can make sure that we got to the break on time. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Now back to Jeannie.
Thank you, Janice. This is our first time doing this online, and the timing element is, we're working it as we go, but she did a great job. That was wonderful. I really love what she did. I'm going to pick up with what vocal exercises can and cannot do on the other side of this break. So we have a break now between 2:30 and 3:15. That's New York time. So if you're in another time zone, just give yourself a 45-minute break. Please do the movement. Please avail yourself of these wonderful 5-minute movement sessions we have. And we will pick up on the other side of this at 3:15 with Betsy giving you an overview of what you are supposed to watch and recorded online of the age-based parameters, which she has for you. And she's going to tell you about that. Okay, so that will be from the other side of the break, and then I'll pick up with the rest of the stuff that's course materials. Okay, see you in 45.